The emergence of COVID-19 has forced the legal industry to rapidly undergo a fundamental transformation. I'm Jack Newton, CEO and co-founder of Clio, the world's leading cloud-based legal software provider. In each episode of Daily Matters, we'll explore what this new normal means for law firms, how legal professionals can find success while working remotely, and how lawyers can best serve their clients during this unprecedented time. Today's guest is Jason Morris, lead legendary counsel at Roundtable Law, a solo practice he operates remotely from his home in Alberta, Canada. Jason, it's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Jack. Pleasure to be here.
So, Jason, I'd like to start off just asking how you and your family are doing. Walk us through what's going on in your life. Maybe give us a bit of context in terms of where you are today and what kinds of COVID-19 related orders are in force in your jurisdiction.
Sure. So I'm in Sherwood Park, just outside of Edmonton, Alberta. And the rules in Alberta right now are much like most of Canada, I think, which is it's mostly shut down. Specifically, they say no meetings more than 15 people, but I think everyone is basically at this point trying to avoid coming into contact with anyone if they don't absolutely need to. Schools are shut down, of course, so I'm now the schoolmaster in the house as well. I've got a kid in grade 10, another in grade 6, and another in grade 3, which has been challenging, but thankfully this week is spring break, so I'm taking a bit of a rest from that. Yeah, which is desperately needed. My wife is an RN. She works in home care, which of course is essential service. So she's still at work, still visiting patients, but they're also social isolating. So she's now working out of our master bedroom. So we've got 2 home offices now instead of the usual one. I've been running my law firm as a virtual paperless practice from, 15 paces from my master bedroom. I like to brag that my commute was 15 paces. My wife can now roll out of the bed and sit in her desk. So she's got me beat.
She's got you beat by a wide margin.
Yeah.
And how are you juggling running your law practice and being a home tutor for your kids? And maybe tell us a bit more about your law practice. Tell us what being lead legendary counsel means, and maybe also tell us what you're seeing kind of on the front lines from your law practice and what the impacts of COVID-19 have been.
Sure. I mean, my practice is very atypical. I'm like I said, I'm home based and I'm virtual. I do a lot of work for Legal Aid Alberta as a duty counsel in front of mental health review panels, and that can be anywhere from like 1/6 to 1/4 of my work in a given month. And then I also do a few wills and estates, which has not been very much until recently. And then a little bit of corporate litigation work. But at the same time that I was running my law firm, I'm a part-time master's student at the University of Alberta. And so the law firm was never full-time for me. So in that sense, the degree to which my workload has changed is actually way less than I expect most people would be experiencing. It's been pretty much the same for me just because my workload was relatively low to start with. Just in the last couple of days here, I've been making some changes, and I think that I'm actually going to get busier in my law practice over the course of the next few weeks than I have been over the last few months, for sure. But that's kind of where the law practice sits.
One question I wanted to pick up is how you're juggling the home tutoring and managing your law practice as well. So this week you're going to get a bit of a reprieve with spring break. My kids actually just came off spring break this week, so we're 2 days into juggling my 2 full-time jobs and kids dialed into Zoom meetings with their school, and it's tricky, and I think we're going to be in it for the long haul. So I haven't figured out the secret formula. I would love to know if you have.
Oh no, I've got the secret formula. Are you ready?
You might want to write this down. Okay.
So what you want to do is you want to take a deep breath and then lower your expectations. That's the only thing there is for it.
That's probably a great pro tip.
There's no way that any one human being can do all the things that we're expecting to do the way that all of the professionals who used to do them independently used to do it, right? Like even the teachers who were dealing with 30 kids at a time weren't dealing with 3 different grade levels of material at the same time.
Yeah.
So, it's what we're being asked to do is effectively ridiculous. So we just kind of aim for what you think might be the most important thing, and see if you can stuff that into the schedule somewhere. But if at the end of this, if a year from now all of your kids are healthy, but they're not completely up to speed on math, no one is going to look at you sideways.
Yeah.
Right?
Take the wins you can. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's, I'm just struggling to remember that I have limitations, and that it's not a moral failing to stay within them.
Yeah. I think that's a great bit of advice. And I think especially on social media, I've seen a few comments where people are saying, enough with the stories of how you're doing an amazing job of homeschooling your kids and achieving all of your professional goals and staying healthy and getting your daily exercise routine in. Can somebody just give us a moment to appreciate the fact that there's a global pandemic and some of us are freaking out here?
Yeah. If
trying to get by, just clinging to the side of the rocket ship as best we can.
Yes. If you can still be kind to the other people in your house after we've been doing this for a few weeks, then you are a hero in my books. That should be enough.
That's a really excellent thought. And I think something is a useful reminder. So Jason, tell me what's on your mind most right now, aside from kind of the, how am I going to manage my day-to-day, juggling my maybe increasingly busy law practice and suddenly way busier home life, and part-time role, maybe full-time role as a school teacher for 3 different grade levels. What else is on your mind, if there's room for anything else?
Yeah, I spend the time that I'm not spending trying to figure out what's going on with school, I'm spending trying to make the new way of doing business as efficient as I possibly can. So I have the advantage that I'm studying computational law. I've been working with DocAssemble and other kinds of legal service automation tools for a long time. So, and as a reaction to the virus, the Law Society in Alberta and the courts here have been making a few changes about what kinds of things we are and aren't allowed to do. So that's created an opportunity to start providing services completely online in some categories. And the one that I'm focused on right now is wills, because my wife is a nurse. We have a lot of friends who are doctors and nurses, and it's kind of heart-wrenching to hear, but it's true. We've had a bunch of our friends who are doctors calling us saying we don't have wills and we'd be crazy not to get them right now. So what I'm working on mostly right now is trying to get a very efficient way of delivering wills and other estate planning documents to people who are medical professionals in Alberta. So I've essentially said, if you are a medical professional in Alberta, I'm going to give you these documents for half the usual fee. And I'm currently working on an online intake tool that will generate the retainer agreements and collect driver's licenses and IDs and things like that, because I'm now permitted by the Law Society to do my client identification online. And
how are you doing that, Jason, just from a practical standpoint?
So I'm building a DocAssemble interview that is going to collect the usual information that you would collect from someone in an intake process. DocAssemble also allows you to insert file uploads into the interview, which if you're on a phone, will actually let you just use your phone and snap a picture of whatever piece of paper it is or document. So on the page that requires the driver's license, they can just click on the button, go to camera, and take a picture of the driver's license, and it'll upload it to the website. So that's what I'm doing. It's kind of a convenient online intake tool. And then I'm also building my web questionnaire into an online tool that will make that, as easy as possible and try and speed up the process.
And the ID verification piece, and this is something I think a lot of lawyers are struggling with right now, is the know your client rules, and how does that translate to the 21st century. So tell us more about what the Law Society of Alberta, which admittedly is just one jurisdiction, but we have bar leaders and many others in leadership roles listening to this podcast. So Alberta might offer a useful precedent for them to think about in terms of how they've evolved their rules and thinking around this.
Yeah, and they, I have to say, to their credit, the Law Society here in Alberta and the Court of Queen's Bench and Court of Appeal have been very responsive and very fast to come up with ways of dealing with this. My understanding of what the Law Society of Alberta has done is essentially that they've said the obligations that you have to verify your client's identification by viewing original government ID, um, for now, it will be considered acceptable to get a digital um, picture of that ID. And I think the basic assumption is that you're going to be video conferencing with people, so have them show you the ID during the video conference and take a screen capture of it during the video conference and compare the appearance on the ID to their appearance on the video conference in order to satisfy yourself. So obviously, it's not as good as being able to look at the physical card and verify that it has the security features. But under the circumstances, I think the Law Society is right to say we've got bigger
Yeah,
problems than people pretending to be someone else to a lawyer.
that's right. I think that's really progressive. And you've talked about DocAssemble a few times,
Mm-hmm.
and you're doing some really cool work with DocAssemble. I know that you've wired it up to Clio in some interesting
Yeah.
ways. You're doing some intake work with DocAssemble. Uh, tell me more about DocAssemble. What is it? You know, and kind of explain it to me like I'm five.
Yeah, sure. So DocAssemble is this great tool that was made by Jonathan Pyle, who's this guy who works for a pro bono legal organization down in the US, and like me is a lawyer and a programmer. So he was building online intake tools for the nonprofit that he works for, and was finding that process slow and repetitive. He was having to code the same thing over and over and over again. So he basically built himself a tool that would allow him to use the document that he was trying to generate as the source code for the interview. And that would make it easier for the software to figure out what questions it needs to ask and in what order, and then generate a document based on the answers. So he created this thing for his own use and put it out there as an open source tool. It's very easy to deploy because it's available as a Docker application. So you can effectively type one command into your server and it will download and install and run the web server, and you have the whole thing up and running in 15 minutes. And so it's been it's been growing in popularity. I think it was named one of the top web tools for lawyers in 2019, and then of the other 19 on the top 20 list, 2 or 3 of them were tools that had been built using DocAssemble. So it alone was accounting for 20% of all the top web tools in 2018, 2019. So it's been becoming more and more popular. I've been doing some consulting work with a friend of mine in Boston, helping other people deploy it for legal purposes. But it's really kind of the best that we have out there in terms of automating legal services in an open source way. And open source is also great because it's free, and I'm cheap. So
Open source is great because it's free and it's great for cheap people, but it also lets you modify it if you need to as well. It lets you kind of contribute back to the community, and
which
if
is
the tool doesn't do something you need it to, you can jump into the source code and modify it. Yeah.
Which is how we got it to connect to Clio. So I'm now that I have this intake system up and running, I've got it to the point now where it will generate a legal services agreement, send it to the client, let the client sign it electronically, send it back to me. I approve it, do my conflict check or what have you. Next step is for me to have that connected to Clio and actually create a matter and upload the document to Clio so it's on there, and get everything started on the Clio side as well. So it's great what you can do with these open source tools because they're so interoperable with everything else.
And I'm curious, what kind of input documents does it take? Can you feed in your standard issue Microsoft Word file, or does it need to be written in special programmer language? Tell us about the kind of practicalities of this tool.
Sure, you have some options. I find that the best option is actually a Microsoft Word file. And you do have to format the file in the way that you would for any kind of document automation tool. So you have to put conditionals in there and
special fields
the actual
and
yeah. Same as for Hot Docs or for Contract Express or any other tool out there. But once you have that document formatted that way, you can upload it to the DocAssemble server, and then it becomes part of the source code. It figures out what questions to ask and in what order and whether to ask them based on what you've typed into the document. So it's really effective. And they've come up with things now that are just in the last few months. They've got these things that are kind of universal document fillers, where the interface is not as customized, but you can literally just upload a document and you have a fully functional interview that will collect all of the data to be able to fill that document. So the technology is cool now and getting better. If you don't want to use Microsoft Word, you can also use Markdown formatted documents and generate your own. And you can also use fillable PDFs.
Okay.
If it's a fillable PDF with forms, it grabs the field names for you, and you can automate the interview development that way as well.
Very cool. If people want to learn more about DocAssemble, where should they go?
Docassemble.org is the website. It has amazing documentation, and there's also a Slack group that I just can't recommend enough. I think it's docassemble.slack.com, but check the website and see. They're extremely supportive, and I've never waited more than 5 minutes for an answer to a question.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And Jason, I'm sure there's a ton of our listeners that are thinking DocAssemble sounds cool and something that is maybe more of a priority in this COVID-19 environment than it's ever been. Mm-hmm. How do we move some of our intake workflows and other systems online? How do we automate our law practice and make it as efficient as possible? I loved what you were talking about with kind of offering, lower cost will and estate planning to medical professionals. And being able to do that is all about creating efficiencies in your law firm. And document automation is one of the, I think, lowest hanging fruit for most law firms that not only helps make you more productive, it helps eliminate errors, it helps you streamline so many processes. And often filling out forms online is something your clients would actually prefer to do over coming into your office and having you interview them.
Yeah.
So I think it's one of these things that are going to be one of the impacts we see of this COVID-19 situation is a more aggressive embrace of tools like DocAssemble. Maybe pivoting a little bit to the non-technical lawyer that might be listening, thinking, well, great, Jason can do all this stuff because he's got technical chops and knows how to program, and I've got no idea how to do that, so I can't do document automation. Is there a solution for them? Is there a way for them to embrace this technology while being at least mostly non-technical, maybe technical enough to go into the Microsoft Word document and get the right kind of merge fields and so on in there? But beyond that, are there consulting resources you can hire? Are there is it something the average layperson can pick up without too much of a lift?
Yeah, I believe it is. I mean, what I'm trying to do is relatively complicated, right? I'm trying to deal with situations where I need to know, who has this person specified as their trustee, and who have they specified as their witness, and I need to be certain that they didn't give me the same person twice,
right?
Because it results in an invalid document. Most of what you're doing in terms of document automation is not going to be that complicated. The data structures are not going to be that complicated. Clio has got great features in it if you're a Clio customer for doing document automation that is on kind of like a one level of data structure. That's more than most people are going to need in order to be more efficient in generating retainer agreements or letters or what have you. There's definitely things you can do. And if you want to go more complicated than that, the great news is that there are a lot of people who are generating these tools and then making them freely available. There's a group called community.lawyer out of New York that's providing.
That's a very cool tool.
It is so cool. And if you use the free version, they'll let you do whatever you want as long as you make it available to everyone else. So there is a lot of stuff that you can just take. Someone's already built it. And
Community.lawyer was actually a contestant in our launch code competition at the Clio Cloud conference this past year.
And they are built on top of DocAssemble. So it's
they're built on top of
DocAssemble,
and they're built on top of Clio. And it was just this really cool, almost meta language and meta tool that you could use to kind of build things and connect things. And
it's very neat.
It was pretty amazing. I was really blown away by that one, and I was I was rooting for them, but I also think it was a pretty sophisticated concept to parse exactly what they were
It is.
doing.
And part of the problem here is that we talk about doc assemble and we talk about document automation, but what you're getting here is not actually specifically document automation. What you're getting is interview automation. That's the thing that you get out of using document assemble that most people don't realize is whereas you might have experience with something like hot docs or some other tool where the target audience is the person who works in the firm and knows what the terms mean and how the document is supposed to be assembled in the end. And so the interface is complicated, but it's okay
Right.
for it to be complicated because of the target market. What DocAssemble does differently is it allows you to do document automation and very easily create a front end that's realistic to give to your clients. That's the major thing, is that you're interviewing not just the assembly of the document, but the development of the interview that the client experiences online. So it's as
Right.
much about that user front end as it is about the document assembly. But yeah, I mean, there are great features like Community Lawyer is one. There's another company out of California called Documate, which is also built on top of DocAssemble, and offers an easier to use version. And then if what you want to do isn't possible through either of those, my friend Quentin and I run a consulting firm called Lemma Legal. Get in touch with us and we will let you know how hard it is to build whatever it is you're thinking about building. And almost anything is possible.
Yeah.
It's really, really, really flexible.
Yeah, you can do branching logic. You can automate, I think, much more complex documents than most people anticipate.
It goes really, really deep. I did a project for the ABA at the end of 2018 and 2019 that you guys at Clio helped sponsor. Thank you very much, which was to build something that we could add to
Yeah, I remember
DocAssemble.
that. That was a very cool project.
Yeah, to make it possible to answer subjective legal questions on the basis of a database of cases. So there's all kinds of like AI stuff that you can stick on the back end, and you can really make this as powerful as you want to spend the time for. But like you said, the thing right now is there really, really are low-hanging fruit. There are things that are easy to do. It won't take you 3 weeks to make it happen. And it's going to help. It's going to make things a little bit easier. And at the end of this, you're going to be wondering why you didn't do it that way the whole time.
Great. Well, we could talk all day about document automation, and I'll try to stop geeking out on this for a moment and shift gears a little bit in terms of
For sure.
Maybe talking more about your clients, some of the initial responses you're seeing from them in this crisis. You talked a little bit about the even practical implications of things like know your client and how you're navigating that. Are you seeing other shifts in expectations from your clients that you're needing to calibrate how you run your law firm, or are there changes you'd made even in the initial design of how you run your law firm that you're feeling like were especially, maybe accidentally prescient decisions when you implement them that are paying off in this environment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really someone who is in the beneficial position of being able to say, well, look, my law firm is already totally COVID compliant.
Right.
I already do video conferencing by default. I already operate paperless. I already operate out of my home. I'm not meeting my clients unless it's absolutely necessary, and the Law Society has very generously made it less necessary now. So that's been a benefit. What I have seen a lot of change in is not actually the needs of my clients, but the needs of administrative tribunals that I act in front of. So I'm a duty counsel in front of mental health review panels, which is an itinerant panel of 3 people now that goes from hospital to hospital, hearing applications from people who are trying to get out of psychiatric facilities. You can't have a bunch of lawyers and panel members walking in and out of 3 or 4 different hospitals a day now, every week, right? That's not okay anymore. So what do these people do? Well, I, a couple of weeks ago, spent the better part of a Tuesday online trying to figure out how to use Zoom so that I could send a set of instructions to the chairwoman of the panel so that she could start holding Zoom meetings the next day. And they just did, right? It would have been a thing before, but it's not a thing anymore. The motivations are there. The just get it done attitude is there. So it was just a matter of saying, no, here's like, it's going to cost you $40 a month or whatever. And here's a set of instructions and follow this. And it's not perfect, but it'll work and we can improve it as we go. And the next day, that panel was holding exclusively video conference hearings. So that's kind of where I'm seeing a lot of changes is the people who are running tribunals, the people who are running courts. I've been in a group of people in Alberta here who are working with the Minister of Justice to try and help point the way towards getting the courts reopened in a way that's responsible and responsible both from a public health perspective, but also from a justice system perspective. And it's that same thing. It's like everyone kind of realizes, look, we have a reason that we absolutely have to do something now. And we know that there's an opportunity here to start doing things the way that they ought to have been done for a long time. Across the board, everyone recognizes it.
One of the silver linings I've thought about a lot is that the COVID-19 crisis has almost created permission to experiment and experiment out of necessity.
Yes.
And also the permission for failing being there as well. I think to your point around the resistance to change and when would this have happened in the environments you just described absent a crisis? And the answer is probably never.
Right.
Not even 5 or 10 years down the road. The answer is probably never. And this crisis has created a new reality for us thanks to that permission to experiment and permission to fail. But I think in many cases finding that there's permission to experiment and then see success and realize that this is actually a better way of doing things.
Yeah. And I mean, it's in a cynical sense, everyone is still motivated by fear of failure. Everyone is still motivated by risk. It's just now there's a more important risk than trying something that doesn't work properly.
Right.
The risk is people get sick and die. And so to avoid that risk, we'll accept smaller risks in terms of technology experiments and things like that. And we're giving ourselves more freedom to try things that we really should have been doing for a long time.
And for law firms, I think that analogy holds where we see appetite for risk saying, hey, let's try running our law firm in the cloud. Let's run our law firm in a distributed and work from home way that probably would have been a far off concept, for most law firms a month ago, that it's now do that experiment or die.
Yeah.
And that's like you said, the lower risk move is embrace the cloud, embrace distributed work, trust your employees. That's all right. Of those things that would have been anathema just a month ago are all of a sudden completely within the realm of possibility.
Yeah. And there's those two things keep coming up when I'm talking to people about what you have to do differently when you switch to this new way of working. And one is that word you just said, trust. You have to change the attitude that you have towards risk avoidance. You have to stop worrying so much about, for example, when the Law Society changed the rules with the driver's licenses, they are placing less significance on the risk that a person might try to pretend who they are to a lawyer, right? Which really doesn't happen a whole heck of a lot. There's good reasons that those rules are there in terms of fraud avoidance and things of that nature, but it doesn't happen so much or so frequently that that accepting that risk doesn't make sense in the context of trying to avoid infections. So that's the same sort of thing. You do have to have more trust. I think the courts are going to have more trust in lawyers. I think that law firms are going to have more trust in their employees. And I think that law societies are going to have more trust in lawyers and in clients. And I think everyone is just going to have to kind of come to a new level of acceptable risk here. But the other thing is, and this is something that my wife has experienced too when she's been doing virtual meetings with the people she works with in the healthcare system, is we don't realize the degree to which our organizational structures are built around physical proximity. We don't realize the degree to which we supervise by walking down the hall. You see that a person is in their office and that is a mechanism that you use in order to see what's happening. That's an accountability mechanism that you use in a physical office that you don't have when you go virtual. And
Right.
trust is important, and you're going to have to change what your strategy is there, but you're also going to have to build new ways of intentionally recreating those sorts of structures. So there's some sort of supervision things that you're going to need to do in a more deliberate way. People who are managers are going to need to be taking the initiative to check in with people more frequently, but also on the social side, right? The relationships that you have with the people that you work with, there's something about that water cooler that really does work as a kind of a social hub. It creates a sense of cohesiveness. It creates a sense of people having had a shared experience. And that can go away if you're not careful when you do
Yeah.
virtual, which is why it's so critical to just go out of the way to have regular meetings online, Zoom conferences, go out of the way to do things that are silly, go out of the way to do things that are fun, go out of the way to ask people about things other than work, and make sure that you maintain those social connections and those relationships, and get people to be conscious about talking to each other more.
Yeah.
Because just like complaining out loud about something that you're doing on your desk, that's good enough if you're in an office where 5 people can hear you. One of those people might have had that problem before and know how to deal with it, and then your problem gets solved. But complaining to yourself at your desk when you're alone at home working from home isn't good enough. That needs to go into the Slack message, right? You need to complain out loud in Slack. Otherwise,
Yeah.
the communication is going to happen. So there's things that you have to do differently in a virtual work environment, and it takes some consciousness, and it feels a little awkward and strange at first, but it has a ton of value. And so people need to, those are the two things. You need to be conscious
Yeah.
about those relationships and change the way you think about trust.
Yeah. I think that's, to put my own experience on the trust piece. I think that many tech companies already work, I think, with a fair amount of trust.
Mm-hmm.
And the phrase I use often is the Peter Drucker quote, which is, "What gets measured gets managed."
Mm-hmm.
And I think what many more traditional businesses, including many law firms, measured was how many hours are people in their seats per day.
Yeah.
And that's what they managed to as well. You've got to be in by this time in the morning, and I expect you to be in until this time at night. Instead of measuring true impact and the
Yeah.
work that's getting done. And I think this is maybe one of the more fundamental transformations we may see in the legal industry, is a shift to a different way of measuring what work gets done and managing how work gets done, a model where there's more trust. And I think that'll be a really positive transformation, because I think there's many lawyers and legal professionals in the broader ecosystem that feel that the lifestyle that is demanded by the average law firm is just not sustainable. And does this crisis help create potentially a more sustainable environment for lawyers to operate within?
Yeah, I mean, my secret wish would be all of the really big firm lawyers that get sent home to do work from home stuff suddenly realize that they don't actually need the 27th story of a downtown tower
Yes.
in order to be an effective legal practitioner, and they see the possibility to create a healthier and happier way to live as a lawyer as a result of this. I think it would be great if we ended up with, tens of thousands of more efficient solo practices after all this is said and done. I think we'd end up with tens of thousands happier lawyers and a better profession for it.
Fingers crossed. Okay, Jason, I'm going to shift gears dramatically here, and my producers are going to be mad at me if I don't get a chance to have you answer a question that I know you promised you'd answer our producer in the pre-podcast conversation, which is how you're managing your Dungeons and Dragons games remotely.
Right.
Tell us about Dungeons and Dragons. Maybe for some of our listeners that don't know what D&D is, give us a really brief high-level overview, and how are you taking that into the age of the coronavirus?
So Dungeons and Dragons, for people who aren't familiar, is it's a paper and pencil role-playing game. And the idea of this game is that you have one person who is kind of aware of the rest of the world, and then the rest of the players are kind of helping one character move their way through this story. So I, as the dungeon master, deal with everything that isn't one of your players, and then the players deal with their characters and try and get the characters through the story. And it is a storytelling game. The point of the game is that at the end of the experience, what you will have gone through is something similar to what you might have read out of a Tolkien novel. An experience with elves and dwarves and dragons and fighting and magic and what have you, that kind of followed a plot. And so it's part strategy game on the tactics side, the fighting side. It's also part collective improvisation and storytelling. And so it's a really, really good creative outlet. And it's a really good form of escape. It forces you to put yourself inside the mind of this fictional creature that you've created and try and navigate their problems, not yours. So it's a really, really healthy kind of experience for people to have. I've had a ton of fun doing it. The bad news from the perspective of lawyers is that if you look at Dungeons and Dragons, you're going to be embarrassed at how far behind the legal profession is in terms of adopting technology. The people who play Dungeons and Dragons are not having a problem with COVID. The technology that I've been using is something called Roll20 that's been around for, I think, 10 years or something like that, which is a website that effectively acts as a video conferencing tool and also helps keep track of all of the rules for the Dungeon Master, and also shows you a map of where your character is and automatically changes the lighting to show you which parts of the map your character can
Oh,
see.
cool.
It's frankly a little bit better than playing the game at a table in a lot of ways. So I have this group of 5 players and myself. We meet every Saturday and play for a few hours, and we just switched over to doing it over Zoom conferencing. I just put them on a Zoom conference and I run Roll20 twice. I run it on one screen as a dungeon master and I run it on another screen as a player. And then I just screen share the player screen. So they don't have to do anything. They just get into a video conference and they've got their dice and their books and they do what they would usually do at the table, except now up on the screen, they've got this nice map and icons and showing where the bad guys are and how many hit points they have left and who casted Field of Thorns or what have you. And so, yeah, it's great, but it's way easier to go from being a in-person dungeon master to an online dungeon master than it is to going from being an in-person lawyer in a court to an online dispute resolution task. We don't have the kinds of tools for the justice system that we have for Dungeons and Dragons. It would be amazing if there was an online dispute resolution equivalent to Roll20, because following rules, facilitating conversations, making sure that only the right people are seeing what they're supposed to be seeing, these are problems that the Dungeon Master has too online, and they're solved.
Really,
they're solved.
Really interesting. So, I think you've told us that the Dungeons and Dragons community is adapted to COVID-19 in a remarkably seamless way.
Yeah.
And there's actually practical applications of the same technology, like Roll20, for example, that could actually be applied to the legal space, maybe more easily than one might imagine. The technology is out there is maybe the takeaway I'm hearing.
The technology is out there, and when you look at what they've done in terms of being able to create a virtual tabletop that exists between a bunch of people who need to be able to see the same thing at the same time, we actually have a lot more of these technological problems solved than we think we might. If we could get the Roll20 people to write software for online tribunals, I think we'd be set in a couple of weeks.
Wow. I will go check out Roll20. Sounds like a very cool piece of technology.
It is, yeah. Very cool.
Well, Jason, this conversation has run by super quickly. Really enjoyed it. And I'll close with a final question, which is, what's your main message to others, either as legal professionals or just as people at this time?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it just keeps coming back to that idea of um, give yourself permission to be human. You are not going to be able to solve the problems around you. This isn't even a problem. It's just a situation. It's something that most of us can't really do anything about right now. We just have to survive. So set yourself smaller than seem reasonable goals. Set really, really small targets. And your target should not be accomplishing as much as you can today or this week. Your target should be creating a way of moving forward that you're going to be able to sustain. Because we don't know how long we're going to have to do this. It could be a matter of months. It could be more. And so we have to come up with a way of doing this that is going to keep us healthy and keep us sane and keep us happy and keep us connected to the people we care about and love. And so it's just that's goal number one. It's not about your income. It's not about your billable hours. It's not about whether or not the homework gets done. It's about, is everyone fed? Is everyone healthy? Is everyone happy? And that's, you just got to keep your eyes there and count yourself a hero if you manage it, because this is really, really unusual circumstances, and just surviving is an accomplishment.
That's a great ending perspective. Thanks for joining us today, Jason. I really enjoyed our conversation, and you taught me a lot about the tools and technologies that are out there right now.
Pleasure, Jack. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us on Daily Matters, a podcast from Clio. Rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Daily Matters is produced by Andrew Booth, Sam Rosenthal, and Derek Bolin, and hosted by yours truly, Jack Newton. Thanks also to Clio, the world's leading cloud-based legal technology provider, for supporting this podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Clio, please visit clio.com. And for more resources to help lawyers navigate the challenges of COVID-19, please visit clio.com.